Okay.
Okay.
It's pretty sensitive, so it'll pick up the sound. Your first name and last name and the spelling and your title.
Andrew LeBay. My last name is L-A-B as in boy, A-Y. Director of Horticulture. I've been here at the garden for a little over 6 years. Yeah.
Is director of horticulture meaning that you are in charge of the whole thing, or just the horticulture?
The plants, and so the goal is to make the gardens look stunning, the landscapes look stunning, up to the expectation that we have, the high expectations that we have here for this garden, in addition to just overall plant health for our collections. And just kind of managing all the staff members we have doing all these things, all the gardeners.
That's fine. Is it? But this isn't part of the. It's not important. But does that mean you're in charge of the whole botanical gardens, or just the plants, which are of course the gardens?
Correct, just the horticultural aspect.
Who's in charge of the whole thing?
So our CEO is Sabina Carr.
Okay. All right.
She's been with us since 2019. And so yeah.
So the San Antonio Botanical Gardens, I've never bothered to ask. Is this
non-for-profit?
Non-profit. Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know.
No, certainly. So it for a long time, the majority of the history was City of San Antonio Parks and Recreation. It in January 2019. There's a transition to a non-profit. The land here is still city, but essentially it's managed by the non-profit.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Non-profit.
Yeah.
All right. So health benefits of houseplants.
Yeah.
They have a list here, but I'm sure you know what they are. I see you have one.
So I can jump in and really a little bit to my background. I've developed I developed and taught an interior plant course at Palo Alto College and the notes, and that's what I'm pulling up in my background.
Please do. Help yourself.
Because a lot of your questions, it's the standard questions that we jump into. And so it's the interest has without a doubt been growing over the last 10 years and more. I mean, if you look at the bigger picture of interior plants, really in the 70s, there's the big boom, if you will. I mean, there's been plants grown in houses for a long time, but there was sort of the modern version of what we think about as houseplants. Started in the late 60s and 70s, and that's when you see the green industry boom to support that movement, and particularly most of the plants that we consider houseplants are grown in Florida, and you see a big boom in the nursery industry. At that point, it plateaus, around the 80s. Throughout the 80s and 90s, you just kind of have a steady state. Still great interest, but not growth. But then you move into the 2000s, and it starts booming again, reminiscent of previous. Of this, like the 70s, and I know when I was developing the class, just digging through articles, there's lots of wonderful articles on, why this is growing rapidly,
why it's trending,
and really it's a lot of there's a couple of things put out there. For instance, just the new generations, whatever you want to call them, millennials, et cetera. Just looking for, you've got more people. Of course, there's all the reasons why there's benefits, and just wanting to bring something in that house, in your house, living, being cared for. It's easier than pets. Okay, people who are mobile, it's easier to take care of than a dog or a cat, but it's still something living and caring in your interior space. And then with the boom of social media too, you've got just an increase in the trending of the types of plants. And there's a lot of, I know when I started this course, I joined a lot of these local interior plant groups, and it's really interesting to see just the interests, the passions, and everything for interior plants.
It's like it becomes a hobby because there are so many species, and so does it sort of almost become a hobby? to know the many different kinds of plants
Yeah, there's,
for some people?
yeah, and it's, there's different plants that become popular and trend, and that changes over time. And it's, a lot of people just like those unique, rare things, and so that drives, trends as well. Early on there was this one called the Chinese money plant. Very simple little plant that's actually kind of rare in China. Actually, very, very easy to grow. They're also called pass it along plants because they pup, and you can just hand the pup and pass it along and just keep growing it. And they grow well in low light environments, all the things that you look for. But there were points where, like on eBay, for instance, these plants were the value, for a small plant, it was like $15 to $30 for a little plant. And so you see this trend, and then now it's easier to come by, but you see these trends move over time. But yeah, it's been trending, and it doesn't seem to slow down. We have a lot of with these conservatories, with the glass houses, we have a lot of interior spaces, and we have a lot of the plants that a lot of the interior enthusiasts seek. And so it's from that angle that I developed my background with these plants. And then we are interested as a garden to kind of talk about them, promote them, have classes about them because of that interest we're seeing. You've got more and more like small apartments, townhomes, don't have space for a big yard, but so they're wanting that to bring nature indoors.
Yeah.
And so because of that growth, we are responding as a garden with that gardening interest. Yeah.
So there is a desire to bring nature more into our lives.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've got a list here of kind of the why do we do this and the benefits.
Yeah. Okay.
And there's some good points to talk about with that. There's a term called biophilia, our love for nature.
Oh.
And you can dig into that in many different ways. We're a part of nature. And we love nature. We need nature. And so in part, this is bringing nature into spaces that doesn't naturally have it, into our interior spaces. It enhances our interior spaces. It's like decoration. This becomes like our furniture, a piece of our interior decoration. So people kind of course with their homes, they express themselves and their styles and everything, and plants can be a part of that. And so that's one of to decorate for a hobby to kind of keep us busy, and especially like it's 100 and what degrees outside,
3 or 4 or 5.
we have an itch to garden, and so we can bring that gardening space into an interior space. So that's another big reason. Also to clean the air. I've got a comment on that one. So that is a very, very common
misconception.
Well, yes. Yes and no. So it's a commonly talked about aspect to why we should bring plants in. It all goes back actually to some research that NASA was doing in the 80s for the space shuttle program, and trying to have plants in those confined spaces to clean up air, filter, and if so, what plants are good for that?
Yeah.
And so there was some interesting research that came out of it. The answers were yes. Plants can filter, clean up. There are some plants recommended, and there's some of the ones that the tropical foliage plants that we typically have in our interior spaces. I guess one thing to talk about is the amounts that they do are pretty minimal.
Oh.
When you really dig into it, in terms of things like just venting your house could also accomplish.
I'm a big proponent of fresh air, opening windows and letting out fresh air.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is that because we believe that plants give off oxygen and soak up carbon dioxide. Is that correct still?
Yes. So so plants they absorb carbon dioxide.
Which we breathe out.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then they do output some oxygen. They also use
some oxygen, not tons. Then.
Well,
not maybe to the degree that we're thinking. They're not a total filtration system.
Well, two different things. So yes, they do pump out a lot of oxygen. I mean, plants in a general sense, they're a part of creating the atmosphere that we have on Earth. I mean, a part of oxygenating the oxygen.
Right.
So in a sense, yes, that is an important aspect of plants in a broad sense. But in terms of filtering things like different hydrocarbons, things that I'm just going to make sure I use the right word.
So they do release oxygen. Of course.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
and they soak up our carbon dioxide.
And they also breathe just like we breathe. Well, not like we breathe, but they do take in oxygen as well and utilize that also. But in the totality, they give off more than they take in.
Okay, so
anyway.
we can still rest assured that if we do have plants, that they help a little bit improve air quality.
Yes, I think the bottom line is they do some. I don't think it's to the extent that we could imagine them doing.
Okay.
And like I said, I think that ventilating houses does wonders as well. Is what I can say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's still a positive benefit.
Yes.
What about how do plants lower stress and anxiety? Would you say? Because they're pretty and they're quiet and they're what would you say as a botanist?
Yeah, and it's a tough. Maybe it's a good one, but it's also a tough one as a botanist because I might be in a way biased just because I naturally gravitate to working with plants. It's a passion. I think there's probably a lot of different reasons in terms of how and why plants say lower stress, make us feel better. That might be kind of many different individual reasons, but it's certainly clear that for myself, for a lot of the folks I work with, that time spent working with plants, time spent working in the garden is an overall positive experience and stress relieving experience. And there is also some research out there in terms of how it impacts our microbiome.
Oh, really?
And
everybody's
so,
into that.
Yeah, and so the microbiome, all of the organisms and stuff that are in our guts and our skins and things. There's some, I'd say, relatively new research that says that working with soils, working with plants, that has a positive impact. So you can, in a very general sense, think of it as probiotic, if you will.
Okay.
Not I'd say probiotic in a quote, because it's not quite what we think of when we talk about medically probiotics.
Yeah, right.
But then again, I mean, we are interacting with a lot of microbes that help sort of train, our microbiome. Now, there are also, some we can interact when we interact with plants. There's also toxins and pathogens that we can interact with too. But I think it's understanding both. Like for an example, there's a specific fungus that grows on roses that sometimes if you get a cut and you can get in, it can become infectious.
I think I know a famous writer that died that way.
Yeah, it's not, and this isn't to be alarmist in and not to have people say don't work with roses.
Yeah.
But yeah, there
That's
are
an outdoor plant anyway.
Yeah, and so it's things like, for instance, here we tend to wear gloves when we work with roses because also they have thorns, and so there are. So yes, it's not that everything is positive and probiotic, but I think there is some evidence that they can help support our microbiome.
Let's see. It says here. improve office performance and focus. Do your employees have plants in their office?
They love having plants in their office.
So you have indoor plants around here, obviously.
The funniest aspect of this is I probably have the least amount
of
plants
I noticed you had one.
in my office, and I'm the director of horticulture.
Yeah.
So no, it's
you're busy.
And then my office is also out there too. So.
Yes, I understand.
And so,
but
so
it
yes,
does improve office performance and focus.
I think I could say that. I think, like I said, everyone loves, and we always pull plants from our greenhouses and help add to office spaces. Everyone loves. Maybe it's a little bit of a biased crowd here, at the Botanical Garden. That is something that kind of unifies us as a group. But yes, I would agree with that statement.
It's a bunch of botanists running around. So I saw a documentary one time. I really thought the most interesting part was that it was very slow-mo, and it showed, plants are living, and it showed them having the same characteristics as people. It was pushing out another plant to get to the sun. I know mesquite trees are vicious because their roots spread out and they steal water from other trees. So it demonstrated that they're living and fighting for survival just like every other living creature. Could you talk about that? Because people see them as static.
Yes, no, they're definitely dynamic. They respond to all sorts of environmental cues. They grow towards light. They seek out, light. They also seek out nutrients and water in the soils.
Yeah.
When we see a plant out in the landscape, we're seeing 50% of that specimen. I mean, that individual. I mean, 50% of it's underground. And it's also dynamic, interacting with other organisms. There's a lot of, for instance, fungi associations with roots, and so they'll grow together, or they'll push each other away. And so, no, just because we can't see them, and just because plants generally kind of stick in the same spot, does not mean that they're static or non-living. They're very much, like I said earlier,
thriving and alive.
They breathe. They communicate one to another. They communicate via chemical signals. So when you injure a plant, it will send out signals to nearby plants. So and those and then the versions of their immune systems are different than our immune systems, but they do have immune systems, will all of a sudden activate in those plants around. And so there's a lot of different topics that we can go into.
Sort of like the secret lives of plants. And the indoor plants are still plants, so they have the same sort of secret life for a house plant, because it's a plant.
Yes. Yeah, there's one of the biggest things to talk about when we talk about indoor plants is, when you look through what a plant needs to live, and it's actually very easy to grow plants if you just focus on the environmental needs that they have. It's actually very easy to grow plants. And they're very remarkable in their adaptability to different environments, and their ability to reproduce. And I can go into all that. But the biggest thing that we have to realize is how dark our interior spaces actually are, and how little amount of light is in our interior spaces. In my class, I've got I think I've got it here, a photometer, and it measures light and the amount. It measures the amount of light that's in our interior.
That's like for photography.
Like for photography, exactly. Our phones and our cameras kind of have this as automatic. And so right now I'm reading 51, and this is in foot candles. Generally, plants, and I've got lists that show like the amount of foot candles that a typical plant looks for in different plants.
Interesting.
Generally, we're talking like 100 to 200 is what they're looking for in order to grow.
Yeah.
I'm talking
Interesting.
50. I'm still at like 53, okay? And this is right next to the window. Of course, a lot of our modern windows have tents. They don't allow a lot of light because it keeps the building cooler, and that's The biggest thing is light, and it's. See, where's my little.
So your plant.
for growth 200, 100.
Yeah,
That's
see.
what all, and these are lists of the most common interior plants.
Okay.
So even quite commonly we don't realize how plants are really looking for a lot more light than we have, and so a lot of times the plants that we grow inside, they're kind of the plants that don't. I don't know a good way to put it. They die slowly with these low amounts of light, and so they're not necessarily thriving and growing.
Yeah.
They're just maintaining a static state.
Yeah.
And that static state, that maintenance that we defined, is for every leaf you lose, they put on a new leaf. So they just kind of maintain a status quo, and that is, for many aspects, defines for a lot of our interior spaces a good interior plant. And it's not, unless we have like a sunroom or a room that really brings in the light,
right?
Then, or a conservatory like we have.
Yeah.
And an interesting thing, we showcase a lot of plants in our conservatory that are grown in interior spaces, and maybe people think of them as being yay big, that you find at Home Depot and Lowe's and the different nurseries and such, and they stay relatively small in inches. Well, they're 20 feet in our conservatory spaces, and so that's one of in my class and in talking about interiors, it's kind of one of the things that we touch on, is there's a lot of things you can talk about in terms of maintaining, watering, fertilizing pests, et cetera, but the low light levels that we typically have in our house is a major limiting factor for growing things.
So even if, I guess, of course, ideally next to the window with sun. Okay.
Yeah, we talk about, the south window or the west window could be too hot. Usually the north window is usually too dark. The east window is usually a good one. But then there's so many things, like you look at this window and there's all these there's so many things that are blocking the light coming in.
Yes, right.
And so it's and then when I think it's always important, I like to talk about that light level first, because then when you start talking about things like, you had a question about pests and such, generally that is something that attacks whenever the plant's not in those ideal conditions.
Oh, let me go back. So so when I had trouble with some pests then, or insects rather, or gnats flying around, some of that was the plant suffering sort of an attack by some bugs.
And there's a variety of different,
because there's not a big outdoor air to.
Well, it usually
moisture builds up inside.
Okay. So there's several different types of pests that we commonly get with interior plants. Okay. So there's different ones, and there's different. You've got a condition essentially. If a pest finds itself here, you've on a plant, or typically we bring them in, with the plant. They'll get it at the nurseries, and then we'll
pest is coming along
for the ride, and then they build up. But again, we've got a situation where the light level is probably not necessarily ideal for the plant.
Okay.
So it's that is a stressor. If you start adding additional stressors, for instance, like if the plant stays maybe a little too wet, which is generally because again, these interior spaces are cool, it doesn't wick and dry, and that plant functions by pulling up that water and having it evaporate its leaves, and that kind of is its way of transporting things throughout. In the cooler space, it's not, that process is not churning like it does in the heat of the outside.
Yeah, because we have air conditioning inside.
Air conditioning, and so it's easy to water and then have that water stay stagnant, and then you can get infections, and then you can get pests on top.
Yeah, I see.
And so it's very critical when we talk about growing plants inside is having a strong focus on your moisture level and letting things go dry in between watering.
Yes, that is something I do know because someone I know is a plant expert. She said always put your finger deep into the soil and only when it's dry do you water.
Yeah. And
overwatering is quite is like a criminal act, isn't it?
Overwatering, in a general sense, is the downfall, I guess, if you will, or for interior plants more than underwatering. So it's, especially if you talk about something like orchids, which are common. People commonly buy orchids.
They sure do.
And there's a couple things with orchids. One, they typically sell them in pots that don't drain well.
Yeah.
And then like a ceramic that doesn't have a hole in the bottle.
Yeah.
And you fill it with water, and then that water sits on the roots,
and
that'll
just rots it.
That'll rot it and kill it real quick.
Yeah.
Or it, it's in a way it's a little too much to frequency, a little too much love, wanting to water that plant.
Yeah.
And so that's a common, and orchids are another good example of the low light level. A lot of people get an orchid and they'll maybe grow it well and water it well, but then they'll comment that it doesn't reflower that often. And that is because of too little light. To initiate the flowering on most of our orchids, they don't want full-on direct light, but they want a very, very bright indirect light, and which is not often provided in our interior spaces. So it's not enough light.
No, so yeah, so everybody's so crazy about them, but I understand exactly what you're saying. Well, what flowering plants would do well inside? And would it be possible to have, or Ashley, or because she has my email, to send me that list? And with the,
I can send
with the foot candles, which is a term I've never, I didn't know, and I learned today.
Yeah, I can send this. I can kind of trim out this PowerPoint and shoot it your way because it's also got plant recommendations.
Okay.
There's a lot of different recommendations. Like I've got. Water management. So, that's what I wanted. So your question on which flowering plants? So
yeah, because I know about. Of course, I want to know about the plants that do this. I mean, I just thought about flowering plants because there are flowering plants.
So I'll take it from a big version down. So in a general sense, with our interior plants, having said all of this thing about light, the most common interior plants are the ones that they're typically tropical foliage plants, because those are the ones that have evolved in areas with very low light levels, under canopies.
The jungle or something.
Yeah, so they're adapted to grow in these spaces with very, very low light levels. So that's what we go for. And so that group of plants, as a general rule, it's more of a foliage driven, and that's what we see with interiors. Is the most popular plants are more foliage, like your monsteras and the mother-in-law's tongues, the sansevierias. We don't normally think about the flower.
Yeah, I just thought about the flower. I just threw it in there for a list,
Yeah.
What about the editor wanted me to ask you about the snake plant? Everybody seems to like that one.
Yeah, which is also called the mother-in-law's tongue.
Oh, that's the mother. Okay.
Or it's the genus is Sansevieria.
Yeah. Okay.
So that
is that
one,
a recommended one?
It is. It's native to Central America. It is very good at maintaining at very low light levels.
Therefore you don't have to worry about. You don't have to fret about a dying plant.
And it's also, there's a lot of, in terms of the way we care for it, we actually care for that one a lot like our cacti and succulent, our arid plant, meaning that it actually very much does not like to be overwatered.
Yeah.
You really want to keep it on the drier side, particularly in winter.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's one sitting right here. It's been here for about 2 years in a low light level. They're very good about that. What I explained at the beginning, that kind of slow death. They're just a very static plant, just able to just kind of sit there.
Yeah.
And so that's one reason. Although they would love more light than we typically have in interior, but they can persist in very low light levels.
And that's why people like them, or that's why they're successful indoors.
Yes,
Okay.
I think the second thing you said is is very important.
Yeah.
Because I mean, people would love to have all kinds of plants in interior, but we are, again, the environment we have indoors does dictate.
It's not ideal.
It's not.
For a living thing.
For plants.
Yeah,
I mean,
plants,
certainly
right.
the way that we build our houses,
because that's that would be, that's what any homeowner doesn't want, is our dying plants all over the place.
Sure.
Makes them feel like they're
Sure.
a failure.
Sure.
Doesn't it? Doesn't it have this sort of psychological thing that the things that, then they're like, oh, I'm not doing a very good job.
It can, but we joke in horticulture that good horticulture has killed a lot of plants, and and we learn you learn about how to grow a plant sometimes from learning what not to do. So I mean that again, just
that's
kind of joking.
That's the horticulture joke.
Yeah.
Because every industry has its inside joke.
Yeah, and so it does teach us whenever we say grow the wrong plant in those spaces and such. So but yeah, there's a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of, having said all of the challenge, some of the challenges we have with low light, there are plants that do thrive in our interior spaces. I mean, I can think of a plant like a Hoya, which is an old time vine that will actually flower just fine in interiors. It has a nice fragrance to it. The Syngonium, or the arrowhead plant, is another one that does really, really good in interior spaces. So rubber plants do, I say, medium pretty good.
Okay.
They're those and philodendrons, they'll want a little bit more than some of those. Light.
Ferns are so popular indoors because they don't need as much light.
Ferns also are another one that grow. They are another challenge we have interiors that specific for ferns is our humidity levels too. Typically our HVAC systems, and specifically in winter, our heaters really dry out the inside spaces, and so certain plants, ferns in particular, really like higher humidity, say up in the 70s or 80%. And our interior spaces, we generally feel more comfortable when it's more 50% or so. We in growing interior plants, that's sort of one thing that we recommend is don't put your plants near your vents, where it's pumping out a lot of air. Also group them together so that they'll stay more humid. And then you can do things like put a tray under it with rocks and fill it with water, and that'll kind of humidify that little area.
Good point.
So there's little tricks that we can do to try to increase the humidity, but that is, a lot of these tropical foliage plants really like elevated humidities. Sometimes you'll see people kind of spritzing and humidifying. There's different tricks and stuff. But.
So the flower of a plant is where the seeds of the plant are coming out, and then they spread by the wind or birds or bees or whatever, and then that's how the plant grows itself.
Yep, it's the
That's
reproductive.
what a flower is.
It's the reproductive organ that.
Wouldn't all plants flower in that case?
No, flowers are.
Or do some plants not?
Correct. Yeah, not all plants have flowers.
Okay.
All our flowering plants are, things like our pine trees don't have flowers. Mosses don't have flowers. Some of the flowers, there was a point in evolution where flowers developed, and that point, and plants were already around. So that was an evolutionary development within within the plant kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd have to look back in terms of like the percentage. I mean, it's a very high percentage of plants that are flowering plants. But other so the ones that don't have flowers have just other means to do to develop their seeds.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that just, I don't know what sparked, but I suddenly thought about, do we still have plants and flowers from the prehistoric times?
Oh yeah. Do we? So you mean examples from? Yeah. Well, prehistoric. So.
I know the Earth has gone through millions of changes, but I just, out of curiosity, I wondered, because we're always talking about like so-and-so, the Galapagos turtle is from,
Yes.
I just wondered, because I know.
The flowers developed during the age of the dinosaurs, so it goes way back, definitely prehistory, and so,
Wow.
and then, but yes, there are plants that we can talk about as being evolutionarily very old versus relatively new. Things like cycads, which like what we call the I'm blanking on the common name of the sago palms. Those are cycads, and those represent a plant that evolutionarily is can be considered very old. So it's representing a type of plant that is like all the flowering plants. You think
before
like
the dinosaurs.
Early. A lot of like.
I've forgotten all the geological periods.
Right. Yeah.
I tried to memorize them one time, but.
And so that's.
But we do have still prehistoric plants still live on the earth.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're representative.
The species.
Yeah, so they're representative of things that have basically changed very little since those times.
Yeah.
Is a way to but it is. I mean, they're essentially the cycads and other plants like that. If you go back millennia, they would look very similar, and then you've just had others develop over time. So,
interesting. They're probably not on the list of indoor plants, though.
Do we have some good examples? I mean, palms. Well, that's a good question. I don't.
I didn't mean to get so deep.
Yeah.
People are fascinated by the oldest tree and
right.
That kind of thing.
Yeah,
so,
and yeah.
Well, to get off that, let's see, boosting healing and pain tolerance, is that probably a psychological effect of having living things with you?
So I think that the benefits of interior plants, so there's just, we talked about benefiting, reducing stress, and all the things, having an activity, beautifying our space. I think that all has a positive impact on us in a global sense.
Yeah.
And so I think I would say indirectly.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think that's all the questions that I have. Ashley mentioned somebody who teaches a class. She didn't know.
Would you? Yeah, I know you've been through. I know you've been through the garden. I think you wanted to just kind of interview.
I wanted to ask an educator about the class. It's about it's like a 5-page article, so it's always good to have a second, a couple of different angles.
I can introduce you to Lainey. She's in the.
Yeah, that would be great, because I just wanted to ask her the reception of the people who take the class.
Yeah.
About their enthusiasm and interest and all that stuff.
Yeah. Let me see where she's at. Come in, Lainey. We have our afternoon break right at 2:00.
Oh, okay.
And it's just about finishing.
Okay.
Let's see where I can.
Do they take publicity shots of you? Do you have a publicity shot?
I've got a picture and Ashley can send it your way that we use.
Because your hat reminds me of, and you're so tall, you remind me of the man in the yellow hat. Have you ever seen that on Curious George?
Oh no, yeah.
He's sort of in the same line of work.
Yeah.
And with that hat, that's what you look like. I hope
Okay.
they take pictures of you with that hat.
I don't think I've gotten any with the hat, but yeah.
Because that'd really be perfect. It's
Right.
very Indiana Jones.
Right.
It's as dirty too.
Big hats are good this time of year. So, we all. Yeah, let's see if we can get Lainey. Come in, Lainey. You know what? She may.
Well, would you mind terribly if I took a quick picture of you with the hat outside?
Sure, yeah.
I think it would look really great.
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
And I don't know how many people in San Antonio, because Bob had such a high profile. And how long have you been on the job?
I've been here at the Gardens for 6 years.
Has it been 6 already?
Yeah.
Well, it's be nice to reintroduce. Yeah. Let's see which staff members we have here. You can take a quick walk. Oh, thank you.